Imagine living a lie so completely that the people who could kill you trust you with their lives. Imagine praying 5 times a day, not out of faith, but out of survival. Imagine memorizing scriptures, adopting a name, building an entire identity from scratch, and knowing that one wrong word, one misremembered detail, one suspicious glance could be your last. That was the world Ajit Doval chose to walk into. Not once, not twice, but for years. He didn't carry a weapon into those rooms. He carried something far more dangerous, a story. And the extraordinary, almost unbelievable truth is that it worked. This is the story of the man many call India's real-life James Bond. But unlike the fiction, there was no gadget to save him, no escape hatch, no guarantee he'd walk out alive. There was only his mind, his nerve, and the terrifying discipline to never, not even for a second, break character. Ajit Kumar Doval was born in 1945 in a small village in the Pauri Garhwal district of Uttarakhand in the foothills of the Indian Himalayas. His origins were humble, ordinary, the kind of beginning that gives no hint of what's coming. He studied economics, earned his degree, and in 1968 joined the Indian Police Service. It seemed like a conventional path, a respectable career, a life of structure and order. But Doval wasn't built for ordinary. Within a few years, he transferred into the Intelligence Bureau, India's domestic intelligence agency, and quietly disappeared from public life. What followed was a career so classified, so compartmentalized, that even today, full details remain locked behind layers of official secrecy. What we do know comes in fragments, declassified hints, insider accounts, and the quiet acknowledgement of a government that rarely acknowledges anything. What we know is enough to take your breath away. In the 1980s, the Punjab region of northwestern India was burning. The Sikh separatist movement, demanding an independent homeland called Khalistan, had turned one of India's most prosperous states into a battleground. Militants operated with near total impunity. Bombings, assassinations, mass civilian casualties. The Golden Temple in Amritsar, the holiest shrine in Sikhism, had been transformed into a fortified militant stronghold. The Indian government was desperate. Military operations were messy, politically explosive, and often counterproductive. What they needed was intelligence, real, deep, actionable intelligence from inside the movement itself. That's where Ajit Doval came in. According to multiple accounts, Doval went undercover into the heart of the Khalistan movement. He didn't infiltrate it from the edges. He went deep. He built relationships. He earned trust. He attended meetings, absorbed ideology, and fed critical information back to Indian intelligence, all while living the life of a man he was not. Think about what that actually requires for a moment. You cannot slip. You cannot hesitate at the wrong moment. You cannot reach for a habit that belongs to your real life. Your body language, your vocabulary, your reactions, everything must align with the character you've constructed. Miss one detail and you don't get a second chance to explain yourself. Doval didn't miss. He spent approximately 7 years undercover in Pakistan, a hostile foreign country that considered India an existential rival. 7 years operating in the shadows of a nation where exposure meant almost certain death. He reportedly posed as a Pakistani national, moved within circles of extremist networks, and gathered intelligence that would shape India's counterterrorism strategy for decades. 7 years. Let that settle. Most people can't keep a surprise party secret for 7 hours. Doval maintained a fabricated identity in a foreign country, surrounded by people trained to be suspicious,
for 7 years. The Khalistan operation, believed to be among the most successful intelligence penetrations in Indian history, helped authorities map the internal structure of the militant networks, their safe houses, their leadership chains, their weapons pipelines. It provided the intelligence groundwork that made Operation Blue Star, the Indian Army's 1984 military intervention at the Golden Temple, operationally possible, however controversial that operation would become.
Doval was there, not on the battlefield, but in the invisible war that made the battlefield legible. But Punjab was only the beginning. In October 1999, an Indian Airlines flight, IC-814, was hijacked shortly after taking off from Kathmandu, Nepal. The aircraft, carrying 176 passengers and crew, was eventually forced to land in Kandahar, Afghanistan, which at that point was under Taliban control. It was one of the most complex hostage situations in Indian history. For 8 agonizing days, the hijackers held the plane on a remote tarmac, demanding the release of dangerous militants imprisoned in India. Negotiations were conducted under impossible pressure, the lives of nearly 100 people hanging on every word exchanged across that tarmac. Ajit Doval was part of the negotiating team sent to Kandahar. He sat across from men who would kill without hesitation. He negotiated in a theater of chaos and threat where the wrong sentence could trigger a massacre. The final resolution, which resulted in India releasing 3 high-profile militants, including Masood Azhar, who would later found the terrorist group Jaish-e-Mohammed, was a decision that haunted Indian security policy for years. But the fact that 176 people walked off that plane alive is a testament to what happened inside those negotiations. Doval understood something most people don't about extremists. He didn't approach them as monsters. He approached them as human beings with psychology, with fears, with pride, with pressure points. That understanding, earned not in a classroom but in years of infiltration, is what made him effective in rooms where effectiveness was a matter of life and death. And then came Mizoram. In northeast India, a militant insurgency had been simmering for years. The Mizo National Front, seeking independence, had turned the region into a low-intensity conflict zone. Once again, Doval was deployed, not with a rifle, but with his most reliable weapon, his ability to become someone else. The pattern was consistent across these operations. Go in, build trust, gather intelligence, feed it back, stay alive, get out, repeat. What makes this almost incomprehensible is the psychological toll it must exact. Intelligence professionals who study long-term undercover operations describe a phenomenon sometimes called identity blur, a gradual erosion of the boundary between the person you are playing and the person you actually are. The longer you inhabit a cover identity, the more the edges of your real self begin to soften. Some operatives never fully return. They come back to their families as strangers. They struggle to reconnect with who they were before the mission began. Doval did this not once, but across multiple operations spanning multiple decades in multiple regions and countries. What does that do to a person? What does it cost? We don't know because Doval has never said. In 2014, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi swept to power in a landslide election, he made an appointment that sent a clear message about how he intended to approach national security. He named Ajit Doval as India's National Security Advisor, the most powerful intelligence and strategic position in the country, second only to the Prime Minister himself. The man who had spent decades in the shadows was now operating at the highest levels of Indian statecraft. The spy had become the strategist. Under Doval's watch as NSA, India pursued an increasingly assertive security posture. The 2016 surgical strikes, a cross-border military operation into Pakistani territory in response to a militant attack on an Indian Army base in Uri, were widely attributed to strategic planning shaped by Doval's doctrine. The operation was unprecedented in modern Indian military history. India crossed the line of control, the de facto border that has defined the India-Pakistan conflict for decades, and struck militant launch pads on the other side. No prior Indian government had done this openly. Then came the Balakot airstrikes in 2019, following the Pulwama attack in which a suicide bomber killed 40 Indian security personnel. India launched airstrikes deep inside Pakistani territory, the first such strikes since the 1971 war. The geopolitical reverberations were felt across South Asia and beyond. Critics and supporters alike point to the same source, Doval's influence. His philosophy, often described as offensive defense, argues that the best way to protect India is not to wait for threats to materialize at the border, but to disrupt them at their origin. It is a doctrine not built in think tanks, but in years of field experience, in safe houses and militant camps, in the back alleys of Lahore and the mountains of Mizoram. You don't develop a doctrine like that from reading books. You develop it from surviving.
There are things about Doval's career that remain genuinely unknown, not because the information doesn't exist, but because it is classified at levels that may not be fully declassified within our lifetimes. The full scope of his undercover work, the specific operations he ran, the names he used, the communities he infiltrated, the moments where the mission nearly broke. What we have are outlines, contours, the shape of something extraordinary, seen through frosted glass. But those outlines are remarkable enough.
Here is a man who entered rooms that could have been his grave, who prayed in mosques not as worship but as tradecraft, who spoke in accents not his own, who looked into the eyes of men who would have killed him without hesitation and looked back without flinching, who did this for years, disappeared back into the intelligence apparatus, and then resurfaced at the apex of Indian power, shaping the security decisions of the world's largest democracy.
There is a concept in intelligence work called deep cover. It refers to an operative who doesn't just wear a disguise, someone who builds an entirely alternate life, an alternate history, an alternate self. Deep cover is considered the most dangerous assignment in any intelligence service. The failure rate is high. The psychological cost is enormous. The margin for error is essentially zero. Ajit Doval is by most accounts one of the most successful deep cover operatives in the history of South Asian intelligence. And here's what makes his story uniquely haunting in the modern context. The networks he infiltrated didn't disappear when he left them. The ideologies he mapped didn't dissolve when the operations ended. The militants he outmaneuvered in Punjab and beyond gave rise to successor organizations, some of which are still operational today. The mission never truly ends. It just changes shape.
In 2020, Doval was awarded the Padma Vibhushan, India's second highest civilian honor, in recognition of a lifetime of service that, by necessity, could only be partially described in the citation. How do you honor someone whose greatest achievements cannot be publicly named? How do you write the history of a man whose most important chapters were written in invisible ink? You tell the story you can tell, and you acknowledge the vastness of what you cannot. Ajit Doval is now in his late 70s. He has served as National Security Advisor through 2 terms of the Modi government.
He gives occasional interviews, carefully worded, strategically vague. He writes no memoirs. He attends no speaker circuits. He does not, it seems, feel the need to be known.
Perhaps that is the final mark of a true intelligence professional. The best ones never need you to know their name. They only need to succeed. But we do know his name now, and we know enough of the story to understand what it represents. A life lived at the absolute edge of human risk, in service of a country that could never fully acknowledge what was being sacrificed. The spy who lived as a Muslim for years, not out of malice, not out of hatred, but as an act of extraordinary, dangerous patriotism, walked out of those years and into history. Not with fanfare, not with a parade, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of a man who has already faced the worst the world can offer, and is still standing. In the business of shadows, survival is the only medal that matters. And Ajit Doval is still here.